The Rebel Capitalist Show. All right, guys, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to welcome someone back to the Rebel Capitalist Show. He is definitely a fellow Rebel Capitalist, and he is one of the first people that I kind of connected with on YouTube. And he was, I think, the very first person that was nice enough to give me a shout out back in 2019 when I just started my channel. I think I had maybe 200 subscribers or something like that. So he is back today, and I can't wait to talk to him about commodities and central bank digital currencies and the price of lumber. He is none other than the Uneducated Economist. Welcome back to the show, buddy.
Wow, thank you very much, George. Yeah, I really appreciate it. You know, when I found your channel, you had just a handful of subscribers, and I was just blown away. I'm like, whoa, look at this guy. He is just amazing. And we've been friends ever since. It's been great, man.
Yeah, and I also want to point out that you're going to be speaking at the next Rebel Capitalist Live in Houston. It's going to be awesome. We're going to have you there, Ron Paul, G. Edward Griffin, Luke Gromen, Lynn Alden, Chris Cole. It's going to be awesome, buddy.
I get chills, man, every time I think about it. I am so excited to do this. I so much appreciate you inviting me along for this one, because this is big. This is like one of the bigger things that's happened in my life. So I appreciate it, man. I am so excited about this.
Oh, dude, you're going to crush it, man. You're going to absolutely crush it. And one thing that you'll probably be talking about at Rebel Capitalist Live, which is an insight that's really that you have that is incredibly unique. You know, we can talk about the Chris Coles and the Luke Gromans and the Lynn Aldens all day long, but you have insight to commodity supply chains that none of those pros have. And that's one of the first things that I wanted to talk to you about, because obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but you work at a lumber facility, and you're one of the buyers. So you have seen this whole crazy price going parabolic, crashing, then going parabolic again, now crashing again, down, I think 50 or 60%. So can you walk us through what has happened over the past year or so, or since the cerveza sickness with lumber? And then I want to dive a little bit deeper to the exact supply chain issues that occurred. And the reason I want to do that is because I think a lot of my viewers are interested in commodities just in general, whether it's oil or copper or uranium, and the same dynamics and fundamentals that apply to lumber apply to uranium or anything else. So if we can really understand the nitty-gritty as to how those supply chains work, I think we can better determine the probabilities of price moves in all commodities moving forward.
Okay. Yeah. Now, like you said, I work at a lumber yard. I work at a small retail lumber yard in Astoria, Oregon. We are not like the big giant, distribution that's pumping out hundreds of millions of board feet a year. We are just a regular, just standard old lumber yard. So when it comes to like being in this industry, I have one of the best economic indicators in the entire world. I work the front counter. You know, I am firsthand. I know the phone calls. I know the people who are coming in. I know what they're looking for. I know what the bids are asking. I really have my fingers on the pulse of the industry. Now, as you go farther up line, sure, you can get like, the information on how much like there is in the distribution lines and stuff. But when it comes to the actual feeling of what's going on in the industry, I got it. I mean, I know and feel it very well. And what happened prior to the whole cerveza sickness kicking in, there was a big distribution breakdown. There was a big supply chain breakdown coming out of the British Columbia area. What had happened up there is they had a lot of mills go into shutdown, curtailments. They just had a big issue taking place up there. Now we can go back, and talk about all the different things that had happened that led up to it, but pretty much what came down to is that they had a bug infestation that really started destroying the forest. They went into a salvage mode. They were harvesting more than what they really should have been, and they depleted a lot of their wood inventory out there, and their mills are just struggling to stay open. Now, this all happened prior to any kind of, shutdown or lockdown of the economy.
Right.
That's what was taking place. So already there was a serious issue taking place within the lumber industry. Now, a lot of these mills started establishing their production down in the southern part of the United States. That was right about the same time that the sickness started kicking in.
So when you
And
say
that's
they
when,
moved their production, so they set up mills, additional mills, or they just started sourcing lumber from a different area?
right now, there's a lot to the story, so I'm trying to just get into the important parts of it.
Right.
Yeah. So down in the southern area, 20 years ago, they had this projection on what lumber prices were going to be or sales were going to be like. And so a lot of people took their property down there and they started planting trees with this anticipation that there was going to be this big demand for this lumber. Now, here it is, 20 years later, the mills are all set up down in the southern area, and the flood of trees is just enormous. There is a glut of trees down there, and the farmers are pretty much saying, like, man, we're in huge competition here.
Mm.
So there's an issue down there right now with the property owners and their trees and how much they're getting paid for it. But the mills are all set up basically in the thick of it. So they're making a lot of money being in this particular area where there's a lot of trees, but it takes time to reestablish that supply chain coming from like the British Columbia area down into the southern part of the United States. You
Okay.
think about it, it's rails, it's trucks, it's a lot of distribution networks. And when you have this all set up coming from the northern part of the North America running down into the southern part of the United States, now it's in the southern part of the United States trying to head across over to the west and up into the northern area. That's a huge change in the shift of how supplies are distributed throughout the rest of the United States. Now,
So just so I understand this, so it's not that they have mills in the southern United States; it's that they have an abundance of trees or lumber that they're trying to get to the mills, so then they can take them down and turn them into plywood, 2x4s, basically building materials, and then ship them out to distributors or retailers like you, or bigger box stores like Home Depot or Lowe's or something.
exactly right.
Okay.
And so that's I mean, the way a guy kind of described it to me is like, if you're fishing, you go where the fish are.
Yeah. Right.
Right. And so since the trees have become expensive in a particular area, you go to where the trees are cheaper. And that's where they have gone to. It's actually kind of a sad story for some of the property owners down there who have these gigantic trees that they've been growing for 40 years, thinking that they're sitting on a lot of money that they could sell off to these mills. But the mills have all turned automated. And so they only want a particular size tree. And if it's too big, it doesn't really go through their system very well. So
Oh,
they're telling
wow.
owners with these oversized trees who thought that they had, like, they were sitting on the money. They're telling them, yeah, we'll buy your trees, but we're just going to buy them for pulp price and not really for, quality timber for milling up for lumber. And
Mm.
so poor guys who have been sitting on their trees forever thinking that they were in the money are really out, they're out of it. So
It just goes to show you how intricate the supply chains actually are, and how easily they can be disrupted by not just something like global, like a pandemic, but even something like a bug infestation, or it's just like that butterfly effect that we can
really
see
is.
that can really, when we live in a day of just-in-time supply chains. I think this is a perfect example as to why there's probably a little more risk, maybe to the upside with prices, than most people realize.
Yeah. And well, you also have to think that, if you just look at what was taking place in the industry before the sickness kicked in, and that there was already a glut of inventory and the mills were shutting down. They were depleting inventory before anything ever took place, as far as like a recession or
Yeah,
the
right, right,
I'm trying not to use the word, because I know it's like, it's sensitive to the YouTube algorithms. But prior to that, there was a mill depletion of inventory, the distribution networks, the lumber yards. Everybody had like really kind of cut back on a lot of their inventory that they had on hand. And then when that sickness kicked in, it just depleted it all. Like, everybody was like, there is going to be no building at all taking place. Well, all of
mm,
a sudden everybody has this, and we talked about this, right before it happened. In fact, I think it was on your show that we were talking about the pressure treated prices, or the pressure treated lumber being depleted out of inventory. And it wasn't but a few months later, it was all over the news. So when that took place, when that inventory depletion took place, because everybody thought that there was going to be a lockdown and no purchasing was going to be happening, everybody got this stimulus check. They're at home. They want to improve their surroundings. All these pent-up projects that have been delayed for who knows how long finally came through that year because they had nothing else going on and they had the stimulus check.
Right.
So the lumber yards just got decimated. There was nothing, and it took forever to get material in. Like trying to order 4x4 pressure treated for 2 months was like an incredible hit and miss. I mean, you may get, a unit of 10 footers in or a unit of 16s or something. But as far as having a steady supply of all the different lengths, it wasn't happening. And now
at any price,
at any price, you could have paid $1 million. It wasn't there. It just wasn't, It wasn't there to buy. Now, if you're building a deck or a fence or any kind of project, you need pressure treated lumber to start it. That's where, it starts from the ground and it moves up. And if it's touching the ground, you need treated lumber, especially in my area. Treated lumber is like, I sell a lot of it because we're in such a horrible climate area that you need this pressure treated lumber. Well, when it was just gone and devastatedly, depleted, that's when the real issue with the money started coming in. And once you can't get it and you're a builder and you have a house to build, you will pay any price for that lumber.
Or you'll just put your project on hold.
Or you put the project on hold, yeah. But once you have started it, like if you have rolled out your floor joists, you're on. It's on. You can't say, well, I'll come back to it next year or something like that.
Yeah, I think a lot of the builders were just building foundations and just leaving them.
There is, and there is a lot of foundations that have been waiting for the price drops to go. So there is a lot of pent up projects in the works. And so, yes, we have seen lumber prices drop down to the July contract closed at $490 per thousand, which is like 70% under its all-time high.
Okay, so let's go back. I accidentally went too far ahead there, and I apologize. So we're in this perfect storm, just to kind of recap, where we had, just from a macro, using macro terminology here, our supply got completely destroyed. Everyone thought that there was going to be no demand for lumber, or even if there was, the mills were shutting down prior to the cerveza sickness. And then once that hit, they're like, oh my good, we're definitely going to go out of business now. We're definitely going to go out of business. So all the supply shuts down. There's almost zero supply because of what happened prior, and then because of what happened to what they because of what they expected to happen to the demand side of the equation. And then the demand side of the equation not only doesn't go down, but it increases substantially. So you have zero supply while demand is going through the roof. And so that's kind of where we're at in the story. So how did the supply, obviously that makes prices skyrocket. So where did they start to source lumber to fill these orders, even at a very high price? And then what has brought the price back down?
Okay. So ultimately it was back into manufacturing again. So once the mills fired back up and started producing again, it was just a matter of filling in the supply chain again. And that is where it really becomes difficult, because lumber is so difficult to move, right? You need it by rail, you need it by truck. And if you have a trucking issue or if you have a rail issue, then it doesn't matter how much you produce, you still can't get it moved across the country. And that is really where the big problem started coming in, because the mills can be like, okay, let's fire up and start running more shifts, right? So that's easy enough to try and get production up, but it's not so easy running the distribution lines. So that's really where the breakdown started happening. Like, yeah, it takes some time to get the manufacturing back up, get the production back up to where it needs to be, but the chain, like the flow of materials on a constant move, that's where things have broken down. And again, if you need plywood and you can't get it, you'll pay any price for it. Now, there was also a whole other story that goes into plywood and the manufacturing of plywood and OSB that's different from the lumber story itself, as far as like the production and the resins that it takes to make this plywood. So that's a whole other story along with it, but it kind of goes along with the same thing that lumber did because it's, a product of the lumber industry. So that's really what it comes down to is that, yeah, there was all these distribution networks, but they couldn't get it to flow through the country. Now they're starting to get it to flow again.
So that's when prices come back down.
And that's, well, yeah, once the availability is like, if you went from having, it takes you 6 weeks to get a truckload to all of a sudden it takes a week. Well, then you don't really need that order anymore. Like before you would be in the line. It was like, well, put me in line for the rest of it. But now it's only a week out and I don't need an order in place anymore. So
now when you're placing orders, you're not having any issue getting whatever you need right now.
Yes and no.
Okay.
Yes and no. There is still major issues taking place with a lot of the building materials inside of the supply chain. Fiber cement siding is an issue. Plywood is still an issue, although it's freeing up. Lumber seems to be a lot easier to get. Pressure treated lumber, no problem. Like I can get all the pressure treated lumber I want now. So the supply chain is filling back in. There is a lot of disruptions in it, but for the most part, like what I feel is like the major problems, I think we've peaked out at those things and we're going to start getting into easier acquiring of materials.
Yeah. You know what's going through my head as you're explaining this is it seems as though lumber is a commodity where, although it does take some time, it's not like you just flip a switch and all of a sudden you get all these 2x4s flooding your store. It does, but it doesn't take that much time to get supply coming back online. And as a comparison, let's look at oil, right? If we would have had the same problem with oil, you can't just, it's going to take a lot longer to get supply of oil coming back online as far as an oil well than it would be a lumber mill, right? A lumber mill, I would assume you're back up and running in maybe a month. You got to clean things up, you got to oil the machinery or whatever, get the employees back there. But an oil well, as an example, that doesn't come back online in a month. Or uranium supply, that doesn't come back online in like a month or something. So I think about how we have this movement towards all these ESG investments, right? So basically what that means is there's almost zero funding or capital going into the production of oil. So if we have, kind of this same type of setup, but for different reasons, where the supply of oil goes down and down and down because everyone thinks that the demand side of the equation for oil is just going to plummet. It's just going to, go down to zero within the next 2 or 3 years. So there's no money going into it. So all the suppliers shut down. There's no supply. Then boom, all of a sudden we wake up and realize that wait a minute, we might have a little less demand for oil because Tesla's doing real well or whatever, but we still have a massive amount of demand for oil because, oh, by the way, we got to get the lumber from southern United States up to Canada and then back to Astoria, Oregon, and that takes diesel fuel. And then you have this same type of thing, but it takes a hell of a lot longer for the additional supply to come back online, if it ever does, because we could be in this political environment where it's just impossible to allocate capital to something like oil because it's perceived to be a dirty energy to bring that supply back up to meet the demand need. Have you thought about that? I'm sure you have.
As far as firing the mills back up, it does take some time. It doesn't just fire up inside of like, a month or so. It takes times to get these things set up, get the log distributions moving again in order to get the mills up into a full on operation again. It doesn't just like kind of fire right up. Once they do, then they can start adding more shifts and pumping out more material after that.
Yeah, okay. So that makes sense. But again, I think the main takeaway for the viewer is understanding the details or how detailed the supply chain is with lumber, and therefore how intricate it most likely is with all of the commodities. I know we were talking before, and I had a mentor as an entrepreneur, and this was way back in probably 2005 or something like that. And he would always say to me, George, you got to know what you don't know. And at the time, it sounded so simple. But if you think it through, it's incredibly profound. And as I think the viewers probably hear, you're at the level at which you understand the supply chain of lumber. If they're a commodity investor or any investor, I think they're probably saying to themselves, okay, there's a lot about this that I didn't know.
Yeah.
and, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing, because I think it allows you to better control your risk management in your portfolio, which is probably one of the most important things that you can do. And not only that, but educate yourself about the world around you, to really highlight the fact that there are no certainties. There are no certainties. There are only probabilities. And the main reason there are no certainties is because, to your point, and what we've heard from you about these supply chains, it's just impossible for everyone to know everything or have complete information.
Yeah. And that was one of the things I had talked about on a previous video, was the bullwhip effect, and how a small fluctuation in demand can really create a ripple effect out there farther down this manufacturing and supply chain.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So one of the things that I had brought up in a previous video was talking about those pipe fittings and the ferncoats. And these things are just a very simple pipe fitting that a lot of people who do groundwork, excavation, or septic tank systems and stuff, they use these rubber ferncoats to connect a 3-inch pipe to a 4-inch pipe. Very simple process to kind of continue the project on. And without them, your project kind of stalls. So here, during the whole inventory breakdown of everything, these ferncoats kept coming up in short supply. Well, I had a customer come in who was looking for these things. He said he's been all over the county, could not find them. I said, well, I think I got 3 of them over here on the shelf. We go and look, sure enough, he says, I'll take all 3. And I said, well, don't you need just one? He says, yeah, but I already lost a day's worth of work. I'm not going to let that happen again. I want all 3.
Right, right.
Well, my next order comes up in just a couple of days. The computer system sees that we're out of Fernco, so it orders 3 more. Those 3 come in. Same thing happens with another customer. He comes in, buys 1, but then I had another customer who was out. He bought the other 2, saying, I don't want to be in short supply again. So here the computer system thinks we're constantly out of it, so it's going to up the order up to 8 of them. Now I got 8 on my shelf, but really I only needed 3. So I think of this for a minute. I'm like, okay, well, what if this happened at other stores in throughout the area or just across the nation, that people keep buying these rubber ferncoats because they were out of stock, they need them in order to do their project, and they keep buying them up. Well, the distribution networks, they just keep seeing these orders coming up, and now they see a bigger order coming up because everybody's constantly out. So they go to their national distributor saying, hey, we need more of these rubber ferncoats, and the manufacturer's going, holy moly, look at all these rubber ferncoat orders that we have. We better kick up manufacturing of these things. But really, it was just a small little issue way back at the demand side, where people had run out and didn't want to run out again, so they kind of hoarded up on these things, creating this kind of false demand that really didn't exist. They only needed
it's
one.
not it's not that it's not that the plumbers themselves had more business.
Right.
It's that they bought for a different reason, just because they didn't want to run out in the future. And that's the key. And that goes back to that detail that even the people in the supply chain didn't know. It would take someone like you that was right there in the trenches every single day to understand that.
Even the management of the store might not have even seen it if they were not aware of what sales took place in order to move those ferncoats off the shelf in the first place. So yeah, there's like little misunderstanding of the information, and just a little bit of movement in demand can create a big ripple effect throughout the rest of the manufacturing and distribution networks.
Yeah. And we were talking offline about how, if you were a Wall Street analyst, right, and someone that was, let's say that there was a publicly traded plumbing company, and you were a Wall Street analyst, and you thought you really had an edge because you had someone on the inside at the manufacturing company for these widgets, and they told you that, oh my gosh, then let's say they have lunch with the Wall Street analysts, let's say, and they says, oh my gosh, you don't understand, we're having to make 10 times more of these widgets than we normally have to make. So then the Wall Street analyst comes out and gives a massive buy on this plumbing company because he thinks the plumbing company's business has shot through the roof. Therefore, the next quarter, they're going to report just these incredible, incredible numbers. When in reality, it's not that the plumbing business shot through the roof. It's just that they were buying additional widgets just to prepare for a future potential supply shortage. And again, that's knowing what you don't know and the power of that.
And so you can imagine if this happens on a really big scale, like, rubber fern coats can sit on my shelf for 2 years and ain't gonna do anything. Nothing changes about them, But if it's a perishable, or if it's something that has an expiration date to it, or just kind of loses its appeal for sitting on the shelf for any kind of length of time, and you have over ordered, now what? Now you have a situation in which you have to move this product and get it off of the shelf and stuff. So then you start having like 2-for-1 deals, or just price drops, or whatever happens after that.
Yeah, so you could see these big swings back and forth just because of the distortions that we've seen in the economy from the lockdowns, really. I mean, it all goes back to the government and the central planners. And, if we would not have had those lockdowns, then most likely these issues that you're referring to, this bullwhip effect, would probably still be there, but it might not be there to the same degree. And that's, that goes right back to why communism in Russia collapsed. And the value of price signals. You and I talk about that on our videos all the time. The importance of prices because of the signals that it gives the free market and how to produce. But I don't think people truly absorb that. The importance of prices. But what you're saying right now, hopefully, illustrates how important those prices really are. But even the prices themselves don't give us complete, total information. And even you wouldn't have had that information unless you would have talked to the guy.
That's it.
Right? Like if you would have just been having a bad day or something.
Right.
Or,
yeah.
or
Yeah.
here's your 3 widgets. Okay, great, whatever. You wouldn't even have known what was truly happening.
And George, you should see me at work, man. Like, I am constantly asking everybody what they're like. Buddy of mine, he comes in, he's like, yeah, my cousin is moving up here from Texas. He's tired of building down there. And I'm like, whoa, why? What's going on in Texas? Why wouldn't he want to be building down there? And he's like, no, he just doesn't want to live in Texas anymore, man. Yeah.
You try to get some insight for videos and stuff. Yeah.
What's going on, So
that
do that with everything. There's I can't even help myself to stand at the mini mart counter getting a cup of coffee without asking the guy, how's business been? How many cups of coffee have you sold today? How many chicken? Everybody has information, and I'm constantly asking them about it. I mean, it's all a matter of figuring what's going on. And so it's, to me, like, the information is everywhere and constant, and I'm constantly looking for it. So
yeah.
I feel like information can slip right through your fingers so fast, and it could be golden.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so let's move on to a different topic here. Let's talk about central bank digital currencies. Right before we did the video, I saw that you've done a few videos recently on central bank digital currencies. So what are your thoughts there? What do you think the probabilities are that we get a Fed coin, if you will? And what do you think their objectives will be if we do see this central bank digital currency in the U.S. In the future?
Yeah, I think the central bank digital currency is almost a guarantee at this point. I really don't see how they're going to not do a central bank digital currency. And in the beginning, they will, promote it as a benefit to the people, that it's going to be much easier on everybody to get loans or just have access to money or whatever. They're just going to kind of promote it as this benefit to the people. I personally think that the whole point of their central bank digital currency is so they can take interest rates into negative all the way up to the individual savings account. And you
Right.
won't have another choice because you won't be able to pull your money out in cash. It just won't be any cash to do that with.
So
So
they'll ban cash as well.
eventually, yeah. Now they're not going to come right out and say, "Hey, here's your central bank digital currency. Everybody turn in their cash." It's not going to go like that. What they'll do is they'll make cash a complete nuisance to use to the point that people just won't even want to use it. They'll charge you to withdraw it. They'll charge you to deposit it. They'll just make it a
All
complete.
right.
And whatever that charge is, it's going to be equal to whatever the negative interest rate is on the central bank digital currency. So whether you have central bank digital currency or cash, it's not going to make any difference when it comes to like depositing at the institutional level. So banks, stores, anybody who's like accepting cash is going to accept it at a lower price than what the central bank digital currency is, considering that they would have to, pay a fee to deposit it. At least that's my perception of what's going to happen with it. Ultimately, again, it's more about the central bank digital currency and the way that they can actually inject money into the system to prevent, deflation from occurring or prevent a spiraling of loss of money out there in the circulation of
Or
things.
create significant inflation. Yeah.
Yeah, or to create this significant inflation. Now, the way I see it right now, the Federal Reserve doesn't really have the legal authority to have a central bank digital currency in which they can inject that money directly into the system. All the stimulus programs and everything have to run through the Treasury. Then the Treasury issues out all the checks. That's a very cumbersome and inefficient way of distributing like stimulus. And again, I'm not trying to promote like central bank digital currencies. I'm just kind of looking at it.
Yeah. You're not a
What if
big
we,
fan.
man, you're totally wanting it. I don't. It's not that I want it. It's just what I see happening. But ultimately, what's going to happen is that the central bank digital currencies will be the what they're not like the Federal Reserve will have to have a situation take place in which that they can do this. And I feel that there is going to be a crisis come up in the future where they're like, hey man, it's because we cannot inject this money directly into the system that we need to have a new way of things are going. Now, I honestly think that the
So
Treasury
they can change the Federal Reserve Act.
so they can change the Federal Reserve Act. I think the initial way of introducing those central bank digital currencies will be like a special treasury bond that kicks in if unemployment reaches a particular level or if GDP falls to a particular level. These special bonds that the Treasury has already introduced will give the Federal Reserve the ability to buy those bonds and then immediately direct the money right into the people's digital wallets. That's kind of how I see
And make them
happening.
like 100-year bond or 1,000-year bond with no interest rate, or just some bogus asset that the Fed can have so their balance sheet balances out.
Exactly right. And unless they change the Federal Reserve Act, that's how they're probably going to end up doing it is with these, special bonds and then having a crisis take place because you got to have a crisis in order to get the people to accept the problem, and that's really what's going to happen. So I guess I kind of got off on a little bit here, a little,
No, but
wild.
that's a good point too, and I think it illustrates how so many people believe that the Fed is printing money. The Fed, we have to have inflation because the Fed will just print more money. The Fed will print more money, will print more money. And that they don't really print dollars that circulate in the economy. It's not one and the same. They
Right.
print bank reserves, but just because they take their balance sheet or they print 100 trillion bank reserves, it doesn't necessarily mean that there are more bank reserves, or excuse me, more dollars in the commercial banking system as deposits circulating, chasing goods and services. Usually what has to happen is the commercial banking system has to lend dollars into existence, and that's what gets out there circulating, chasing stuff, really.
Right.
But now, we've seen this hybrid system where the government is doing all of this deficit spending that's being monetized by the Fed. And what's different about that is it is creating more additional dollars. But, I think there the Fed realizes that, okay, to create the additional dollars we need in the real economy to create inflation, if that's their objective, which I think it is obviously to bail out the government, then we can't really rely on the commercial banking system because the amount of loans they're making decreasing. We can't really rely on the politicians because they're just completely crazy and dysfunctional. So we need to take control of the dollar by taking control of lending. And I think, again, that's where a central bank digital currency comes into play for a lot of different reasons. And that's why I think the probability is so high. Not only UBI, not only negative interest rates, but it also gives them control of lending and therefore the amount of dollars. One thing I think you'll find interesting is, the Fed is the third central bank we've had in the United States. And the first one was set up by Alexander Hamilton. And the reason he set up or wanted to set up the central bank is so the bank could lend directly to entities and individuals in the real economy, because the businesses and the people were having a hard time, for obvious reasons, getting loans from banks in England. So he said, let's set up a central bank for the United States so we can lend directly into the economy.
Yeah.
So you see where I'm going with that. I think it's so ironic that now, and they may use that as a way to promote it. Say, hey, listen, the original central bank was set up to loan directly into the real economy. So why don't we do it now? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good way of making the economy run efficiently as far as the transfer of goods and services, for people, so that there's an easy flow of that happens. Like, if you can't get the currency, you might have like, the want to do something, but if you can't get the currency, it just doesn't work out right. If you have like this flow of credit through the system, then everything moves really easily. There's no like hesitation or having to build up a savings in order to make the purchase happen.
But
So
that could be for consumption as well, where we
right.
would see consumer prices go up significantly. If that additional dollars aren't being used to create more goods and services, then
Right.
you've
And that's
got that
where
imbalance.
exactly where it comes down to. And I kind of related it down to beers and saws. Like if you take out credit and you buy beers, you can stimulate the economy with that. Right. I mean, beer is like a manufactured product. You can share it, you can consume it, whatever. Right. So if all the money got borrowed and purchased beers, yeah, that would stimulate the economy. But once the beer's gone, it's gone. Right. It's like that's it. There is no production. There's nothing left from it. It was just a good time while you had the beer. Now, if you borrowed money and purchased saws, you don't really have a good time with that, but then you can use that saw to do production. And if you do enough production with it, it'll pay back the saw, and then you'll have, more revenue coming from the purchasing of that saw. So purchasing a saw with debt is a good thing because it goes towards production and eventually pay back the principal plus interest, right, of the loan. If you take out the money and you buy beer, you're going to have a great time and the economy looks great while you're drinking the beer. But then once the beer is gone, it's all over. So that's kind of how I see it. It's like, all the stimulus and everything has gone into beer. It should have gone into sauce.
Yeah. And another angle on that that I always try to point out is that we look at the creation of additional currency units as kind of the boogeyman, as people who kind of favor Austrian economics, which I think I'd put both of us into that camp. They see the Austrian definition of inflation, just the increase in the money supply. That is bad. That's the boogeyman. Sound money. I get it. And it is true when we're dealing with imperfect humans in an imperfect world. But just on paper, that isn't necessarily true, because you could expand the money supply 10 times, 100 times, and you're not going to get inflation as long as the amount of goods and services that are created go up at the same rate.
Right.
That's the key. That's the key. And I always like to mention that because I think even the people who favor the Austrian sides really, they tend to get fixated on the amount of dollars, when I think it all boils down to the amount of goods and services that are being created.
Right. Absolutely. And I kind of look at that the same way. If you I just kind of look at things like my own life. Like I took out a lot of debt at one time and had a great time while I was on that debt. And then once I stopped taking out the debt and had to pay it off, life sucked. Like, it was a hard time paying that back. But once it was paid back, now life is good again. Like my expenses are really low. I have an income coming in. I don't have any of those liabilities left anymore. I wish I had taken the time when I had debt to use that debt in order to create more money,
Yeah.
but I didn't. I had a good time on it instead.
So basically, what you did, though, from a macro standpoint, is you used those additional dollars that were created by that loan in the first place to consume instead of to produce goods and services. So the initial thing that you did was actually, I would argue, inflationary. Where if you would have taken that loan and used it to produce, it would have been deflationary, but the good type of deflation. And that's where people's purchasing power is increasing, not due to debt, but due to productivity. Therefore, the amount of demand for goods and services actually goes up. But another thing that I wanted to discuss before I forget is something that you and I were talking about offline, and it's a term that you've studied that the central bank, more specifically the Fed, has used as part of their kind of tool bag, if you will. And Bernanke talked about this, I believe, maybe 2005, 2006. And I found that it was a fascinating story. Can you
Yeah.
go into that for the viewers?
Yeah. So one of the things that I like to follow when I listen to the Fed and everything they do is they have a monetary policy called credible threats. And this is a lot of people refer to it as job owning and forward guidance. Now, Ben Bernanke knew, I mean, he talked about this in the speech. They knew that they were going to run into the lower bound. They knew that they were not going to be able to drop interest rates in order to stimulate the economy. And he said that's okay because the Fed has other tools that they can use. And one of those tools that they can use is what I coined the term credible threats. Now, he described it inside of a little story of a guy who invents a gold machine. And with this gold machine, he can produce as much gold at will with very little cost or energy. The moment that this information gets out to the markets that this guy has this gold machine, the price of gold on the markets would just plummet. Even before the guy produces a single ounce of gold or even has the machine, just the credible threat alone would be enough to change the market's perception. And that is one of the main tools of the Federal Reserve. And we saw that happen with the junk bond market
And the
when they
special
set up
purpose vehicles.
with the
Yep,
special
yep, yep.
purpose vehicles. They set up that special purpose vehicles. They funded it with hundreds of billions of dollars. They told the whole market out there and everybody that they were going to be buying junk bonds. They bought a little bit of junk bond to establish that credible threat, and the whole market just tried to front run them. And they bought up all these junk bonds, and the Federal Reserve really didn't have to do anything.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Expectations policy. It's like the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
It's all just a game of smoke and mirrors. And people think, and Snider says this well. He
Mhm.
says the central, once you really understand how the plumbing works and the global monetary system works, you understand that central banks really aren't central to anything. The
Yeah.
only thing they have is psychological manipulation. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. I mean, that's what I see on everything that they do. Like, it seems to have, even right down to their inflation expectations or
Mm.
the way they judge inflation. There is no metric for it. It's whatever they choose to say it is. Like, even in the congressional testimony that Jerome Powell did, what was it, yesterday or the day before? They asked him, and it was just like, how do you come up with this average inflation? And they're like, well, we really don't have a formula for it. Yeah, we don't know.
Just sounds
Right?
good.
If we need it to be,
2%.
4%, we just kind of figure
Nice
out some
even
numbers
number.
until it says 4%, and then we tell you guys it's 4%. I mean, there is no. He straight up admitted there is no formula for it.
Yeah, another funny story that you might enjoy is I actually did a quick video on my other channel last night about this. There was an economist, or is an economist. His name is Stephen Roach, I believe. You guys can Google it. And he was a young economist at the Fed during the 1970s. And the Fed chair throughout the majority of the 70s was a guy named Arthur Burns. And he talked about what Arthur Burns did at the beginning of what we now know as stagflation with the CPI and with the way that the CPI was measured. See, Arthur Burns, and I found this part fascinating as well, didn't believe that he was the opposite of Milton Friedman, which I think is really fascinating in the sense that I think they were good buddies. But Milton Friedman believed that inflation is what always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. I think it was his quote. And Arthur Burns did not believe that. He didn't think that the amount of dollars in the system really had anything to do with inflation or the consumer prices. He thought it was just kind of these one-off like butterfly effects, almost like the bullwhip thing that you were talking about before. So this, at the time, very young economist Stephen Roach, who now wrote this article, is still alive today, said that when the first price that started to go up, I believe was oil. And he remembers having conversations internally at the Fed with Arthur Burns saying, and he said that oil represented like 11% of the way they measured CPI at the time. So out of all the metrics they use, oil was 11% of the overall measurement. And he said that Arthur wanted to omit oil because of this butterfly effect. It really doesn't matter. It's transitory is the word he used. Oh, it's just transitory. So what he effectively did is he made them omit oil from the headline kind of CPI that they announced to the public. And all the other economists under him were saying, how can you do that? Because oil is an input on everything. Even themselves, they're saying, this is crazy, right? But that's not where it ended. The next thing that came about was food prices. And that was like 35% or something like that of the CPI at the time. And so food prices shot up, right? And Burns said, well, I want to omit food prices. And now the economists at the Fed were like, now you've really gone off the deep end. Like, how can you justify that? And he justified it because there was some anomaly with the price of anchovies. Did you hear about? And so what his rationale was because you use anchovies to create fertilizer, as an example, to create like feed for cattle, to do all these other things. So it's not just the price of anchovies, it's the price of anchovies affects all other food prices, just like oil kind of affects everything else. So he wanted to omit that from the CPI, which they did, right? And then so you go down the line, and it was one thing after the other that he would just omit till they got to the point, and this is no lie. You guys can Google this and read this article that Stephen wrote. It was recently. They got to the point where all they had left was 35% of the metrics that they were originally using. They omitted 65% of the inputs until finally in like 1975 or something like that. He had to admit, because the 35% that they still had went up by like another 45%, right? So he finally had to say, okay, I'm wrong. Yeah. And he actually did admit that he was wrong. But, my point there is that we now hear the exact same thing going on at the Fed, where they're saying that this inflation is transitory. And I'm not saying it is or it isn't, but I am saying that they're using the exact same methods that they used back in the 1970s, which proves that, number one, they're not that smart. Number two, history rhymes a lot, so we've got to be students of history. And number three, exactly what you're saying, is the central banks really aren't that central. The only thing they have is really just psychological games that they play.
No, that's what I'm seeing from it. Is it's all about having the market perception. Whatever you can convince the markets to believe. And
Yeah.
I don't know, we talked about that earlier. It's just like, are they losing control of, like, whether or not they have the markets believing them or not? I don't know if they might be able to use that as their credible threat. If the markets don't believe them, then they can start telling them things that they won't believe to get them to behave in ways that they normally wouldn't.
Yeah, and so we were talking about monetary policy there, if you want to look at the Fed, but now I think we've moved into a point where fiscal policy is just
Yeah.
as important. So do you think that fiscal policy is now a part of that of the credible threat, just
Yeah.
maybe even more so than the monetary policy?
Yeah, I think, well, absolutely. I think it's part of the credible threat, and I think of it kind of like dangling a carrot out in front of you. If you have this promise that you are going to get a $2,000 check here in 3 or 4 months, how would your life feel leading up to that? You would be like, man, I don't have to worry so much because I have this $2,000 check coming. And the closer you get to it, and the more credible that you're going to get that, the more likely you're going to feel comfortable spending your money into the economy, knowing that you're going to have this check coming. So, is it a credible threat of a carrot dangling out there saying, hey, you're going to get this money? Go ahead and feel comfortable about spending the money that you have right now because you're going to get this check coming into the future. To me, that is a very big credible threat that the government is using to try and keep this economy rolling.
Yeah, right, right. They could do the same thing with inflation expectations with the market itself, with these stimulus. We're going to spend 6 trillion. No, we're going to spend 10 trillion. No, we're going to spend 20 trillion, and the market absorbs it. And that's that carrot that you're really referring to. But talking about UBI, you and I were discussing this offline. You had another really interesting story about you and your wife taking a vacation and some of the things that you noticed when you were on
Yeah,
your quick little afternoon sabbatical down the coast of Oregon.
right. One of the issues that has taken place right now is everybody is unemployed. Like, there's nobody going to work. I see help wanted signs everywhere out there. And it just leads me to believe what would happen if UBI was to kick in. Because where's the incentive? Where's the incentive to go and, perform a service or to go and produce anything if already you have the money coming in and you don't need to work? If you
Right.
don't need to work, then why would you? My wife and I are taking this trip. We go down to Newport. It's a couple hours down the coast. It's around 7 o'clock. We decided that we are going to stop and get something to eat. Now, the Oregon coast in the middle of July is a very popular place to
Yeah,
be.
that's big
And
tourism. It's not like this is a little
right,
sleepy town in the middle of nowhere, right?
no, between us, yeah. This is like, this is a touristy place. This is where, people come to spend money. We go to look for a restaurant. The only restaurants we found open had lines down the street. The other ones were takeout only, and some of them had closed down at 5 or 7 o'clock. And I thought to myself, why in the world would you be a restaurant shut down on the Oregon coast at 7 o'clock in the middle of July? And it dawned on me, it's because they don't have the staff. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought to myself, man, this is going to be and it's not necessarily on prices, but deflationary in the sense of business taking place. Because if you don't have these people
Yeah,
working,
or
then you're not
deflationary or reduction of economic output is
reduction of
really,
economic output.
yeah,
That's a
right.
good one. Right. And that's what I see taking place right now. And it's happening all over. If these people don't go to work, then you're not going to be able to, have the services and things out there to even buy. So what good is having UBI if it doesn't do anything for you, or you can't, buy anything with it? And then on top of it, what incentive do you have to even go off there and try and produce or serve or do anything? So to me, UBI is going to be a destruction of the economy. At first, it'll look good because everybody will have this money they can go and spend, but give it some time and it'll just, take economic growth down to nothing.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. A story I always tell is if you look at my own personal portfolio uh, today compared to 2019, my portfolio today is significantly larger because of the gains that I had, mostly because I bought so much back in March 2020. March
Mm-hmm.
of 2020, I was buying, especially commodities, just hand over fist. So my portfolio has increased in size significantly since 2019. But I always tell people that even though that has happened, I feel like today I'm poorer than I was in 2019. And the reason I feel poorer is because I have access to fewer goods and services. You know what I mean? Like to
Yeah,
your point, you probably have, let's say you have more money now than you did in 2019, which is probably true.
it is.
But yet in 2019, you could have actually had a nice dinner in Newport, and now, although you've got the money, you can't because everywhere is closed and all the restaurants have lines around the corner. So are you richer now or are you poorer even though you have a few more dollars?
Yeah, that's that is a very interesting way to look at it, George, because I think about that that statement right there. What is wealth,
Right.
right? And I've been studying this Cantillon essay, and the very first thing that he talked about was wealth. And what is wealth? And he described wealth as food, conveniences, and pleasures of life.
Mm,
That's it, right? Pretty simple stuff. Food, conveniences, and pleasures of life. And what good is having the money if you can't get those three things? Right. So is there wealth there? I mean, where is the wealth?
right.
So I want to enjoy my life. I want to sit down and, have dinner, but it's not available out there. So is there a loss of wealth taking place?
Yeah, that mentor that I was referring to earlier that gave me the line, always told me that George, you got to know what you don't know. Um, Another thing that he told me is he said, listen, um, money can't buy you happiness, but it'll buy you a hell of a lot of freedom.
Yep.
So if you're someone who values freedom, then there is definitely a utility for having a significant amount of money.
Yeah.
But what we're saying right now is, for obvious reasons, because of lockdowns. I mean, California, I just saw in the news today, started more restrictions again. I think the restrictions they came out with, it's not, I don't think they did the lockdowns, but I think they now reinstituted the whole having to wear a mask indoors thing. So again, my point is not only when we were talking about the freedom to buy certain goods and services, but even freedom at a personal liberty level, I th- I think is so significantly reduced from
Yep.
2019 that, again, regardless of your portfolio or income, you'd have to say that you're from that, by using that definition, we are all poorer today than we were prior to the government distorting the economy so terribly with these lockdowns.
I totally agree. I just
Or
I think
UBI. And then I guess that takes us to, where we're going in the future. If what we've seen with the lockdowns has, if what we've seen come to fruition, and then in the future with UBI, I mean, assuming this increases, where does that take us as far as goods and services?
I don't know where it's going to actually lead us to. Again, I just think about the incentive.
Yeah.
Like what is it that drives and motivates people? We were talking like a little bit about this offline, but to me, like I enjoy the idea of having a successful sale. Like I enjoy having a project, completed. To me, like it's not so much about the money that I earn, it's about the rewards I get from doing things. And a lot of people, they don't look at it like that. Like if you gave them all the money in the world to not have to work, like you give them, they can live off of $20,000 a year, then they wouldn't try any harder than that. They
Right.
can they can make everything they want, and they'll go to the beach and hang out every day. They won't try to earn any more than what they have, because they don't need to. Other people will take that 20,000 and turn it into $1 million, and then go and do other work and do all kinds of stuff, because they're not limited by just what they need to survive. They really are motivated and want to do things in life. And I
Hmm.
think that's something that we had talked about, that you had people that worked for you that you were talking about had well, what were you saying? Like you started off paying them like, a decent wage, but then they earned more money and they became lazy.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and I saw that at all levels. I mean, we were talking about salespeople that started off, strictly commission, that started off, let's say they're making 100 grand a year, and they're out there hustling. I mean, they're working 60, 70 hours a week. But as soon as they started making like 250 or 300 a year, then they just started to want to work half the month and maybe just a couple, or maybe just a week a month. And you saw their productivity just absolutely plummet at a certain level where they value leisure far more than making an additional dollar. And my point there was not everyone hits that threshold at 300 grand. I think what we're saying is that a lot of people, in fact, maybe the majority of Americans, would probably hit that threshold at 3 grand or 4 grand a month, something
Yep.
like that. Or set, if it was 75,000 a year, they would hit that. So if we get to a point where the government is buying more and more votes, and more and more Americans get to that threshold, that means fewer and fewer goods and services actually being created.
Yeah, that's what I see, because like I said, I mean, I just can't see where, if you're going to hand money over to people, where they would not lose ambition.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, right.
being hungry really motivates you. Being without is a motivator. Like, you want to strive to try and get these things. And I know when I was hungry, I would have worked any job. Like, it didn't matter. I mean, when I was broke and just needed cash and had nothing to my name, it didn't matter if it was blackberries that I was pulling or
Yeah,
construction, doing whatever. I needed that money, and I went out there and worked for it, because you are motivated when you're hungry. But
yeah,
if you take that motivation away and say, well, we need to make life easier on everybody, then you take away that ambition, that drive to go and acquire. That all disappears.
yeah.
And you just, you
Yeah, but tell your personal story there, because you had some rough times, um, when you were
did.
around 40 or so, and you've really turned it around. I mean, you've got
Well,
an incredibly successful YouTube channel now that everyone knows, the Uneducated Economist. I think you've probably got 75,000, 100,000 subscribers, something like that. But you've had a really significant journey in your own life as regarding to, your income and kind of where you've been, is, maybe even being hungry at times, and now being on the other side of the coin.
yeah. Um, I have to tell you, George, I mean, this YouTube channel has really changed my life. It has made a huge, huge difference. You know, when you're 40 years old and you're deeply in debt and you have nothing that's going to carry you farther, like get you out of debt or have anything,
Right.
you don't, you just kind of go,
Do you lose hope?
you lose hope. You just kind of go to more of acceptance. It's just like, some people have, some people don't. I'm one of them that don't. You just kind of just live life like that. You show up every day for work, but there's nothing you can really do at work that's going to advance you any farther. I mean, you might be getting a few extra $100 at the end of the month, but it doesn't really do anything for you.
Right.
But then when you have a life-changing thing like I've had with YouTube come in, it changes everything for you. And even now, I feel myself like, where before, when I was like, had no money at the end of the month, and the people around me were in that same condition, we all related and understood kind of things. But now, like, I don't stress for the monthly payments anymore. I don't stress about anything. I have a savings account and stuff. And I feel myself disconnected already, even though they're my friends and they're right there with me. And it hasn't been that long. I can already feel how their life is much different from mine. And I tell you, like I said, you don't get too many second chances in life. And man, I got one. And I tell you, it really changes the way you think and you feel. You know, you said something, we had talked about this already, but you had said something on your live stream a couple of days ago. And I really took this to heart, because you said something about, like, when you go to make, money, when you make that first $1 million a year, it brings out the worst in you.
Yeah, right.
And I heard what you said there, and I tell you, I don't want to see the worst come out of me. And I am paying attention to what I'm doing with that money. I'm saving pretty much all of it. And I'm trying to stay very humble with what I have going on and understand that, the job that I am doing, my day job, is really where my life is. And that is what is carrying you along. The YouTube thing was a complete bonus.
Yeah, yeah. And by the way, that I was talking from personal experience there. I think that's true. I've seen that happen so many times. But when I was telling that story of the worst come out, I was talking about what happened to me. When I first started making money back when I was in my early 30s, I was there was a point in my life where I was an asshole, man. I was a prick, and I usually don't talk like that on my YouTube channel, but that's the best way to describe it.
And I could easily see that happening. Like you, George, for me, like the last AdSense revenue um deposit that came into my account
Yeah.
was a lot. And I tell you, man, for a guy like me, I was high as a kite when I saw that. I didn't even do any drugs or nothing. I wasn't high. I was just I was just I couldn't believe it. Like, it lifted me up. I was in the clouds. I was in the atmosphere going like, man, is this real? I mean, is this really happening right now?
Yeah.
And and I'm walking around and I feel like I'm cock of the walk or something, because I just had this huge check just land in my account, and I realized, man, you are acting stupid. Stop that.
Yeah.
And I had to reel it back in a little ways and remember that, this shit could disappear very fast and you would be right back to where you were.
Yeah, so
So
you fear losing that as well. There's
I,
a lot of emotions that we're talking about here, but the fear of loss, I'm assuming, is one.
if I was to lose this, it would take a lot out of me, because already I had grown to the acceptance that I wasn't going to have, that grand life or anything. I was just going to be an average dude with an average job and live out my life averagely, and not have anything as far as anything in my life. And now here it is. And it's something that you never expected or anticipated or even know what to do with. And
Yeah.
yeah, to think like to have that taken away would be heartbreaking. It would be heartbreaking.
Yeah. But see, the thing is, it's, I'm a big fan of the UFC, and I hear the fighters always talk about how when the night of the fight, that's kind of like what they enjoy. That's everything that they've worked so hard coming to fruition. The real work is not the 3-minute rounds they put in there, but the real work is all the training to get them up to that point, right? And that's why it's the same thing with your YouTube channel. I mean, I'm guessing you've done 600 or 700 videos, maybe even more. That was the real work that you put in. And the reason why people tune into your channel, it's just to hear what the uneducated economist has to say. It's not they don't care about what George Gammon says or Lynn Alden or Luke Gromen or Chris Cole or anyone. They want to hear what you have to say. So as long as you continue to be yourself and produce just this great content that's such an amazing value to everyone, you're not gonna lose anything. And in fact, it reminds me of a conversation I had dinner with Robert and Kim Kiyosaki the other night, and we were talking about something very similar to this. And they just said they gave me two pieces of advice that I will relay to you because I think it's applicable to what you're doing. They said, George, just continue to be yourself, be authentic, and just protect your brand. As long as you do that, you got nothing to worry about at all. So I would just suggest that you do the exact same, which I'm sure you'll do. And you're just going to become more and more and more successful in the future.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, George, and I will do that. I will be myself, and I will protect my brand. I'm not sure how to do it, but I will work on it today.
But you know what's interesting though is I think that brings us to the conversation of precious metals.
Yeah.
Because if you think about money, the true definition of money, we're talking about like Mike Maloney's definition of money, a store of value. So what have you done with YouTube? I mean, let's think about this. What you've done is you've produced more than you've consumed, right? And right now you are being, like you talked about that YouTube AdSense check that you got. Okay, so that is the what you earned from producing what you produced, and you didn't spend all that. So now you've produced more than you consume. But the key here is, what do you do with that excess productivity to make sure that you don't lose purchasing power with the excess productivity that you now have from the YouTube channel? So I think that's a good segue into precious metals, because in my opinion, that's why everyone should own gold.
Yeah. I buy gold and silver. I buy mainly silver. That's kind of like, my metal that I go into. I try to buy once a month. Now, just recently, I have cut back a little bit on the purchases as far as a monthly purchase goes, just because I think that there's going to be a buying opportunity coming in, and I'll jump back in when that happens. But ultimately, my reasons for buying silver and gold are an insurance policy. It's to be away from the banking system. It's to be, something that is tangible. It's in my hands. You physically have to try and take it from me. There is no app on the phone or an envelope coming in the mail. It's mine, and it's away from everybody. So that gives me the ability to sleep at night. If it's going to hold its purchasing power throughout time, I would think so. I mean, it seems to have, if you kind of dollar cost average over time, it seems to do pretty well as far as
It
holding.
has for about 5,000 years.
Yeah.
So,
buying a little bit every month is probably a pretty good way of going about it. I'm not very good at market timing. So every time I seem to think, okay, I've hit a bottom here, I'm going to buy in, it drops down another 10, 15%. I always miss out when I try to time it. So I just dollar cost average into everything. It seems to work out really well for me. So that's kind of how I've treated that, silver and gold.
Yeah, what comes to mind there, and I just wrote this down, is it's like you're protecting your hard work. You're protecting your excess productivity from counterparty risk.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, even if you save your excess productivity in dollars, well, unless you've got the green pieces of paper, which really is still an IOU, technically, but most people save their excess productivity in these dollars that they keep in a bank account, a deposit account, which is nothing. All it is the bank saying that they owe you that much money. So if the bank goes bust, then your excess productivity, all your hard work, is gone. It evaporates. Poof. It doesn't exist anymore, and that's because of that counterparty risk. So by looking at gold or silver, or maybe some people would put Bitcoin in this category, you don't have any of that counterparty risk to your hard work and excess productivity.
That's right. And that is ultimately why I do it. Now, originally, I was thinking that I was going to make a bunch of money off of silver when it goes to $100,000 or whatever. I mean, just kind of making up a number.
Yeah.
I don't think that way anymore. I really do look at it as that insurance policy. And yeah, you could have your money in a bank and it is FDIC insured, kind of thing. So you don't have to worry about it if you have
But
less than
that's counterparty. That's counterparty.
That's counterparty. That's exactly right. You have to trust the system in order to make you whole again. And I don't like trusting the system.
And what value is the dollars they're paying you back?
That's it. And yeah, and who's to say if you get paid back, if it's going to be worth anything? That's right. So, having money in the bank is really convenient for paying bills or maybe to try and get a loan later on, if that's kind of the thing. But outside of that, I don't see where the bank really benefits you any.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. In fact, I heard Gunlock in an interview the other day talk about how he believes that we will, in the very near future, we will effectively get negative interest rates by the banks just charging more and more fees. And one thing I pointed out in my in a video I did a long time ago, probably a year ago or so, is how high the interest rates are on credit cards.
Mm-hmm.
Although the Fed's at the zero lower bound, so interest rates are at 5,000-year lows, but yet credit cards are at, I don't know if they didn't have credit cards 5,000 years ago, but credit cards are at almost all-time highs. At least they were when I did this video about a year ago. So how do you connect those dots? How do you square that circle? And the reason is because banks are going to make their money. And if we got a flat yield curve and they can't make it through lending, then they're going to make it somehow, and they're going to nickel and dime you to death, or reach in your back pocket without you knowing it, to where effectively you are paying a negative interest rate.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, if you're purchasing on credit cards and then making an interest payment on, oh my goodness, I had to live like that for a long time with a credit card balance. And I tell you, one of the greatest feelings I ever had was the day that I went down. I even did a video on my channel. I showed it when I went down and I paid off that credit card. Holy moly, man, talk about having a relief. Credit cards are probably one of the most dangerous things that people could ever have in their wallet. I mean, it is nothing but it just sucks the life out of you. However, and that's the reason why banks do it, is because of that. But credit cards now, if you're disciplined, are actually a pretty good thing, because most of them now pay you back a percentage, right? So not only do you not pay, like if you pay it off every month, you don't have to pay any interest on it, but then they also send you some money back. So really, you can kind of get 1% of your life back. It's almost like a negative interest loan.
Yeah, right.
But you have to be incredibly disciplined, and most people aren't. They'll just use the card like crazy, and then next thing you know, they can't afford to, they can't make the payments, and they bought stuff they didn't even really want. So you could get 1% of your life back if you're very disciplined with a credit card, or even more,
Yeah.
up to 5% on a lot of things.
I was actually curious to get your opinion on debt, not just that, but like mortgage debt or anything, because usually, and you know what I'm talking about, usually if someone has a really bad experience with consumer debt, like they're the Dave Ramsey type, they want nothing to do with any debt. Like, I don't want a home loan. I don't want a mortgage. I don't want a mortgage on my rental properties. I mean, it's all, I want nothing to do with debt whatsoever. But it sounds like you've gotten to the point where you maybe were in that camp for a while, but now you see, especially I'm sure like a 30-year fixed rate loan on a rental property that has positive cash flow with inflation coming, you see the benefit to that. So you're like, okay, it's not just all debt that's bad. It's just you got to have that self-control, to your point.
That's exactly right. And I am, you describe me really well. I am very jaded when it comes to a mortgage loan. It killed me. I mean, it took 13 years out of my life. I was heavy depression, alcohol, everything, because I blame it on that. I mean, I blame it on myself, but that was the situation that I was in that was driving me down.
Mm.
I do not like the idea of signing up for a 30 years debt slate mortgage. I do like the idea of signing up for a debt that's going to pay me plus, have an asset at the end. That's cool. But if I have to work every day for the next 360 payments to have that asset, I'm backing away from it. I'm not interested in it. It
So
hurts.
maybe the difference between an owner occupied mortgage, if you're living in the home, as opposed to if you're using as a rental property where it's paying you an income above and beyond the mortgage payment.
That's exactly right, George. And, a lot of people, and I know this is really difficult for a lot of people to see it because they look at rent as a bad thing. Like they say something like you're just throwing your money away.
Mm-hmm.
All right. That's totally true because you don't get anything from it at the end of it. You just have the rent payment. And a lot of people say, you have to make a rent payment or you have to make a mortgage payment. No, you have to make a mortgage payment. I get to make a rent payment.
Mm.
And if I
Okay.
don't make a rent payment, I get to find another place to live. Now, that is kind of a bummer for a lot of people who are not capable of just coming up with, say the first second down, whatever you need to get into a house to rent. That could be a very scary place to be. But for me, at the end of every month, I am 100% free. I'm free to do whatever I want. I'm free to invest in what I want. I'm free to go where I want. I'm free to do whatever it is that I choose to do. And to me, making that rent payment is buying a month's worth of freedom. I don't feel like I'm throwing my money away. I feel like I am buying my way out of having to have liabilities. Strange to think that's
With that personal experience, how much of a sugar rush do you think we saw in GDP as a result of the eviction moratoriums and the mortgage forbearance? Because people didn't have that expense or could choose to not have that expense.
I wonder how much that had impacted the economy. How much, because I think again back to like the UBI thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you're in your apartment and you don't have to make rent payment and you didn't make rent payment for 12 months, you're going to have a difficult time making your rent. Even if you had a job the entire time, your expenses, your monthly expense, your buying habits, everything that you do has grown accustomed to not making a rent payment. So now making the rent payment is going to be very difficult because you see. So did it have an impact on the economy? Yeah, I imagine it juiced the economy, gave people like that ability to not have to stress about whether or not they were going to make their rent payment. But now, once that thing ends, even if you have a job, it's going to be difficult, just trying to come back into that payment again. I don't know. I mean, I thought that there was going to be a lot more issues coming up with evictions and, foreclosures and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I thought there was going to be a lot more of that than what we were experiencing. But I almost wonder that because everybody was anticipating it, it dissipated out the effect,
So do you think that they'll continue it? The
What, the
government?
eviction moratoriums and stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think they will. I don't know to what extent and how like individual cities or municipalities and stuff like that might deal with the evictions because, who knows what a
Or the
particular
landlords.
or the landlords or anybody else. So there's a lot of like, individual decision making that's going to have to take place in that.
Right.
It's when I first heard about it, like 6 months ago, when I was thinking about this time, I thought it was going to be like a big event taking place, but now I don't think it's going to be such a big event. And I think it's just something that's going to be absorbed into the economy and maybe have some issues taking place in particular areas. But as far as like a broad effect on the entire nation, I don't think it's quite going to be as a big event as people are thinking it was going to be.
Right. Okay, so I know we've gone way over our time here, man. So let me.
I love
I,
talking. Man, I
yeah,
can talk all day, brother.
yeah. I'd love to get your take on inflation being transitory or whatnot, but I think we're gonna have to save that for another video. And I'm sure you've been discussing that a lot on your YouTube channel. So I'd highly encourage everyone to go over and check out the Uneducated Economist. I believe that's the name of your channel, isn't it?
Uneducated Economist, yes, sir.
Yeah, and I also want to remind everyone that the Uneducated Economist himself will be speaking at Rebel Capitalist Live in Houston with Ron Paul, G. Edward Griffin, Lynn Alden, Luke Gromen, and all the other pros that you see on Rebel Capitalist Show. And he's going to be giving us some awesome insights as to supply chains. And I almost guarantee you who's going to be sitting in the front row, probably Luke Gromen and Lynn Alden, because they're two of the smartest people in the room, if not the smartest people in the space. But I can promise you that they do not have the insights to the intricacies of the supply chain and commodities that you have. So I think they're going to be listening intently.
Well, thank you, George, so much. I tell you, man, I was taken back when you invited me onto the Rebel Capitalist Law. That's, it's probably one of the biggest things that is happening in my life. So I tell you, man, to you, it might just be another thing that's happening, but to me, it's everything in the world. So I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Well, you're going to crush it. You're going to absolutely crush it, man. So everyone's got to get their tickets. But for people who want to find out more about what you do, where can they go? I think you got a website now. I don't even know if you had a website last time we talked.
Yeah, I just fired up the website. We have the uneducatedeconomist.com where you can find all the videos that I post there. Every once in a while, I try to throw up my own writing, like I do an article every once in a while. So I'll try and put those up there. But mostly I'm active on YouTube. So if you want to, get into the comment section of my videos, that's really where I do most of my my communication with the viewers. If you want to do things more private, you can send me an email, uneducatedeconomist@gmail.com. I'm also on all the different social media sites, so you can find me on Twitter and Facebook and Patreon and all those other places like that. But yeah, I'm mostly active on YouTube.
All righty, my friend. Well, as always, I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I can't wait to do it again. I can't wait to finally meet you face to face in January. That's going to be awesome, man. We got to sit down and grab a beer and just get to know each other even better.
Absolutely, man. I'm looking forward to this Texas trip, man.
Hi, guys. I'd like to invite each and every one of you to the next Rebel Capitalist Live event. If you are a fan of the Rebel Capitalist Show, I guarantee you will love the live event. The next one is Houston, where you can meet and listen to speakers, all your favorites from the Rebel Capitalist Show. People such as Dr. Ron Paul, Chris Cole, Lynn Alden, Luke Gromen, just to name a few. If you want to check out the rest of the speaker list and find out how you can attend, we'll put a link in the description below, or you can just go to rebelcapitalistlive.com. This is an event where you can learn to build wealth and thrive in a world of out-of-control central banks and big governments. But it's not just about building wealth. It's about increasing your freedom and networking with like-minded individuals, fellow rebel capitalists. It's an amazing event. I know you'll absolutely love it. Check out rebelcapitalistlive.com, and I will see you in Houston.